I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
All right, if you would take your Bibles and turn to Matthew 16. Now, Matthew 16. We finally got to the content of our book of Matthew. We've talked about the origin of the book. We've talked about the purpose of the book. So what's contained in this book? And really, the way Dave starts this, he actually starts with the end. Because the end is what the entire book is leading up to. Believe it or not, the death of Jesus is not just covered in Matthew 26, 27, and 28. Jesus weaves that throughout his teaching. And three specific times, we'll look at all three, he predicts his death, burial, and resurrection. If we would, let's start at the back today. We'll start with Bill. You want to get Matthew 16, 21. Tammy, you want to get Matthew 17, 22 and 23. And then, Callie, you want to get Matthew 20, verses 17 to 19. First of all, Matthew 16, verse 21.
From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised on the third day.
How specific is Jesus here when it comes to what's going to happen to him?
Right down to the date.
Okay. All right. Well, as far as his resurrection, right down to the day. So he does describe it's the third day. Now, a lot of people have an issue with the third day. Because if you go through the chronology, starting in Matthew 20, all the way, or actually 21, all the way through the end of 28, you realize that Jesus entered Jerusalem on a Sunday. He cleansed the temple on a Monday. Did a lot of his teaching on Tuesday. We don't have record of what happened on Wednesday. But Thursday evening was when he had the Last Supper with the disciples. He went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, and around midnight was arrested. He was tried in the middle of the night on what we would call Friday. He was on the cross at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. He died at 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon and was buried before the sun set because the Sabbath day was coming at sunset. He was in the grave all day. He was in the grave all day Saturday and rose early Sunday. Why do people have a problem with the timeline as I just laid out it?
Well, first of all, try and nail down the exact time.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible because the Jews and the Gentiles had different, they started their days different.
Yes.
But if we argue over the day and try and prove he didn't, then that strips him of his deity, of who he
Sure.
really is.
Matthew, if you want to know where we get 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., you compare Matthew and John. John is more Roman time. Matthew is Jewish time. And so when we talk about the third hour, of course, they don't have wristwatches like we do. And so they tell time by the sun. And so it's about the third hour of the day. That's 9 a.m. because the sun, we come along and say the sun rises at 6 o'clock. Of course, we know the sun doesn't rise exactly at 6. But that's how the Jews told time. And when Jesus cried out, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, it was about the 9th hour. Well, the 9th hour is 3 p.m. Now, the argument usually is over Friday or Thursday. And it usually has to do not with what Jesus talked here about the third day, but the sign of the prophet Jonah, 3 days and 3 nights. in the belly of the fish. And so how many hours are in 3 full days? 72 hours. If Jesus died at around 3 p.m., we don't know the exact hour he rose on Sunday. It was early in the morning sometime. At most, we're talking 40 hours. Give or take a couple hours here or there. Well, people come along and say 40 is nowhere near 72. We're not calling for maybe a full 72, but 40 is nowhere near 72. That's more like, that's not even 2 days. But when we get to our podcast in Luke, I think it's this week, I ask people to look at their calendars. And when you take a look at Friday, if you count Friday, Saturday, Sunday, how many days have you counted? 3 days. We use this type of phrase as well when we talk about days. When I say I'm going to be gone for 4 days, am I literally saying I have to be gone for the complete 4 days? No. I'm going to be going to my mom's house for 3 days. But I'm not returning at midnight on Wednesday night. And in fact, I didn't even count part of today that I'm going to be there. So really, I'm going to be there for 3 and somewhere around a quarter days. We're not exact like that. Jesus said he was going to be raised the 3rd day. Read Luke 24, and you know that the Jews talk that way because the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, when Jesus appeared to them, said, "Don't you know what's happened? This is the 3rd day since this has happened." And so the Jews counted parts of days and counted them as days. 3 days and 3 nights is a turn of phrase to represent 3 days. Was Jonah literally in the belly of the fish for 72 hours? I don't believe that's true. We don't know exactly how long he was in the fish, but it was 3 days and 3 nights.
It could be anywhere up to.
Yes. Yeah, like as far as we don't know on Jonah how long he was in the belly of the great fish.
That could be from 49 hours to 72 hours.
Yeah, well,
The 3rd day would start at the 49th hour.
yeah. But it's a turn of phrase. And so let's not, as Bill says, get tripped up. We need to know that Jesus did fulfill what he said. But once we have an explanation for how he did that, let's not get tripped over, was it 72 hours? Was it 40 hours? Was it 45 hours? Like that, you're missing the point. Did Jesus fulfill what he said or not? So we have the resurrection, the 3rd day. What else do we get from Matthew 16? 21 where Bill is. What else do we learn about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection?
Those that he suffered at their hands.
Okay, and whose hands was that?
That was the religious leaders, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Priests and scribes.
Yeah, the elders, chief priests, and scribes. So we get an identification of who he was going to die at the hands of. Do we get a description of how he was going to be killed in this verse?
No, but suffering means it's not a pleasant.
No.
It's not going to be pleasant.
No. We know it's going to be suffering. Most of the time, the Jews killed by what? Stoning. Jesus, I'm not saying he leaves it open forever, but he doesn't say he was going to be crucified here. He could have been stoned. If it was at the elders, chief priests, and scribes, maybe that's what many people might have thought he was talking about. That he would get a Jewish execution. We get one more.
Suffering too. That's not a pleasant thing.
No.
Calvin and I saw a movie years ago called Stoning at Soraya or something like that.
Okay.
And when they did a stoning, even though it was acting, it looks so real and so horrifying for somebody to go through. Like, it really put goosebumps and
Yeah.
nervousness. It's not a real pleasant thing for
No.
anybody.
No, you're getting pelted with, not, we think of little stones. No, they're not hurling little stones
Not
at you.
pebbles.
Not little pebbles at you. They're throwing rocks at you. And you're going to get hit in the head. You're going to get hit everywhere. And you could die quickly, or you could die slowly, and most of the time you died slowly. If you got hit in the right spot, you could die quite quickly.
Yeah.
But
Life.
like Goliath, yes. We find out, the last thing we find out is where Jesus was going to be crucified. He's not in Jerusalem yet. In fact, he's still in Galilee. But we know he must go up to Jerusalem. Jesus didn't often do that. He would have gone to Jerusalem when he was supposed to go to Jerusalem for the feasts. We don't get a lot of that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We get that in a little bit of John. But we don't get Jesus traveling to Jerusalem that much. But he's going to travel to Jerusalem, and there he is going to die. So that's what we learn about the death, burial, and resurrection from this chapter. Before we move on, did you have something, Bill?
No, I just wondered if it was, the reason you just said killed was for the disciples' sake.
Mhm, yeah.
It's funny, Peter, if he'd have told Peter exactly what was going to happen to him, like, who knows how Peter would have reacted.
Well, actually, verse 22 tells us how Peter reacted to even what he said.
Yeah.
Like, as far as he took him aside, rebuked him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this should not happen to you." Imagine if he'd said he was going to be crucified.
Right.
But wasn't it in Jerusalem where he kept Passover?
Yeah, no, I said he would have gone there for Passover, but Jesus didn't always go there. We often think of Jesus as being in Jerusalem in the temple. No, he's in Galilee. For the majority of the 3 years that he preaches, he's going to be in Galilee. And he's going to be around those towns across the other side of the Sea of Galilee as well, in Decapolis. That's where most of the book of Matthew takes place. Once you get to Matthew 19, then you see, okay, he's in Perea. He's in Perea. He's not in, Perea is on the other side of the Jordan River, closer to Jerusalem. We're going to find him on the road to Jericho in chapter 20. And then we're going to find him in Jerusalem. But other than that, we don't read of him in Jerusalem in the book of Matthew at all, except for this last week. You read of him in Jerusalem in the book of John. You read him at the beginning of the book when he talks to Nicodemus. He's in Jerusalem. We know he went there for the festivals, for the feasts. John is going to have him there for the feasts. And we know he would have been there for the Passover. The Jews were commanded to go there for the Passover. But Matthew doesn't record most of that. So when he says, "I'm going to go up to Jerusalem," okay, that's something the disciples would take note of. Let's go to Matthew 17, verses 22 and 23.
Now while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and the third day he will be raised up." And they were exceedingly sorrowful.
All right, we get a lot of the same details here. But what's the newest detail that we get?
He's betrayed.
He's going to be betrayed. So that should tell the disciples, they were exceedingly sorrowful about that. To be betrayed, what's necessary for someone to be betrayed? You have to think about it like the way I think. You have to know the person who's going to betray you. The scribes and the Pharisees weren't going to betray Christ. They were his enemies.
That was known.
Yeah, you would expect the scribes and the Pharisees to try to kill him.
Usually betrayal is somebody that's close to you, that you wouldn't expect.
And you trust. So by giving us this detail, Jesus is telling the disciples, someone close to me is going to be the one that gives me up. They're not going to capture me like they're not going to arrest me like they arrested John the Baptist. They're just going to come and get me in the crowds. They're not going to They're not going to trick me and arrest me that way. I'm going to be betrayed. Let's go to Matthew 20, verses 17 to 19.
And as Jesus was about to go up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves. And on the way he said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles to mock and scourge and crucify him. On the third day he will be raised up.
All right, so right now, this time when Jesus predicts this, he is within a week of his death. Maybe just a little bit more than a week. He's a lot more specific in this one. What two new details do we get from this one, from this passage?
Going to be betrayed to the chief priests and scribes.
Okay, so betrayed to the chief priests and scribes. But we got that from the last two. We knew the chief priests were involved. We knew he was going to be betrayed to the chief priests and scribes. But there were two other details, both in verse 19.
Delivered to the Gentiles.
Okay, we didn't know he was going to be delivered to the Gentiles. So the Romans are going to be involved too. And what's the last thing?
Now he says he'll be crucified.
Now he says he's going to be mocked, scourged, and crucified. So now he is specific because it's now closer. We see that all the way through the Old Testament. In Genesis 3, the first prophecy about the Messiah was so vague you could miss it. About when God promised through it would be her seed that would crush the head of the serpent. That doesn't sound very messianic to me. But that's what it was. It was so vague, though. You had no idea. When God told Abraham, through your seed all the nations of the world would be blessed. Okay, a little more specificity, but we don't get a lot. When he comes to David, there will be a king raised up to sit on your throne. More specificity. And then you can go through the prophets. You get a piece here, a piece there. But you don't get all the details in one place. I can't say turn to this book, this chapter, and this verse, and you're going to get everything. All the way along, God's giving us another piece, another piece, another piece. And I believe he does that on purpose. Because, remember, the devil is trying to thwart God's plan. The devil doesn't know all. The devil, we sometimes give the devil too much credit in what he knows. He is not the anti-God in the being the opposite, all-powerful, evil God. He is not that. The devil is created just like we are. He is not all-knowing. The devil thought he was defeating Jesus by having him killed, and in reality, he was playing right into Jesus' hands, right into God's hands. Even though the disciples had heard this 3 times, and probably more, it's just recorded for us in Matthew 3 times, they still, upon the resurrection, didn't understand it. Remember, Jesus often said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Well, the disciples weren't asking the important questions. They often talked among themselves, I wonder what that means. I don't know what that means. Because they were looking for an earthly king. They were looking in the wrong places. They didn't have the full understanding. And when when the women appeared at the tomb, the angel said, why do you seek the living among the dead? And they were confused. And in Luke's account, he said, don't you remember what he told you in Galilee? That he would die and be raised the 3rd day? And then they remembered what he said. The disciples were getting a lot of information. Let's not be so hard on them. Because when we were put in that same situation, we probably would have been just like them. We have the whole picture. They didn't. And so we do have that advantage. But we get the most specific picture here in Matthew 20. Bill.
I just thought, you're right, we'd be confused too, because considering that when he told his disciples that he was going to be killed, I don't know whether you might know, but could the Jews stone a person apart from having the Roman authorities okay it? I don't know, but they couldn't kill. They couldn't do capital punishment. The Gentiles had to do that.
Yeah. Well, they tried in John chapter 8 to stone the woman with adultery. I think there were instances when the Romans allowed it, but it would not have, like as far as the Jews would not have wanted to do that with Jesus, because stonings typically took place in public. And a stoning you can stop if you get. Remember, in the chief priests and scribes could have taken Jesus all the last week. He was in the temple. That's what he told the people when they came to arrest him. He says, I was in the temple teaching all week, and you didn't take me then. And so I don't know on the stoning issue, but like as far as it seems like there were stonings, like as far as Stephen was stoned in Acts 7. It seems like there were stonings, but there certainly couldn't have been crucifixion. And so I don't know whether what the Romans do when there was a stoning, but they wanted to make a spectacle of Jesus. They didn't just want him dead. They wanted other people to know he died because he was a heretic. That's what they thought. And they didn't want followers of Jesus to linger on after. A stoning might make him a martyr. Stephen was made a martyr. They wanted a humiliating, excruciating death to keep other people from doing what Jesus did. And so...
But that did the opposite.
Oh, of course it did. Because they didn't know. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's what Jesus asked on the cross. And so they didn't know what they were doing.
I was just thinking, plus when he was on the cross, the religious leaders said, if you are the Son of God, you come down.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and we'll believe you, which I think is a lie.
Yeah.
He had done enough to show that he was the Son of God already, and yet they didn't believe. So the things which Jesus foretold would be within a short time be fulfilled during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, what is that also known as? I don't know. I'm talking about the Jewish Feast of Passover. Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread took place at the same time. The Passover occurred on the 14th day of Nisan at twilight. And it's important we remember when the lamb was killed. Exodus 12 says that the lamb would be killed at twilight. When did the Jewish day begin? No. Sundown. Sundown. So when we change from daylight saving time from daylight saving time to standard time, sun sets an hour earlier tonight than it did last night. Setting at the same time, it's just the way we reckon time is different. If we were counting time as Jewish time, the sun would set, I think, at 5:30. So Monday would begin at 5:30. If I'm going to kill the lamb on the 14th day of the month, of the first month, which was known as Nisan, if I'm going to kill the lamb on the 14th day of the month at twilight, and twilight occurs before sunset, that means that the lamb was killed at the end of the day, not the beginning of the day. Jesus died on the 14th day of the first month. He died at 3 p.m. It's April. March, April. Sun sets right around probably about 6 o'clock, 6:30. The Passover would be eaten that night, 14th going into the 15th day of the month. Jesus died when the Passover lambs were being killed. Think about that. Paul calls Jesus our Passover in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. He calls him our Passover. Because it was his death that allows God to pass over us, remit our sins, and save us. Jesus' death fulfilled the old law in that while the Jews were remembering physical Passover, killing the lamb, using the blood for the symbolism that it represented on the doorposts and the lintel, the Lamb of God was shedding his blood, and he was paying the price for sin. And so we have Jesus fulfilling all of these things. How does Matthew describe the suffering of Jesus in the following passages? Let's go to Matthew 26. We'll come across to Tim. Matthew 26, verses 67 and 68. Oh, sorry, Gord. I'm sorry. Gord can read. You can get the next one, Tim. Matthew 26, verses 67 and 68.
Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?"
Okay. This occurs at a trial. He's not on the cross yet. This is in the middle of the night sometime. In the middle of the night. It's dark. They cover his head with a bag. I think that's what they did in the last verse. Oh, it might not. It might be another version or another count I'm saying. They struck him on the face. They beat him. And they said, "Prophesy." Now, we often think of prophesy as preaching. Prophesying is speaking directly from God. If Jesus was a prophet, so they thought, God would send him the name of the person who struck him. And that didn't happen. Prophets don't always get all details from God, even if we know Jesus is God. I'm not denying that. Don't take me wrong that way. But a prophet, even if he's not God, doesn't get all the information. So even if Jesus was just a prophet like John the Baptist, that not prophesying there is not proof that Jesus wasn't a prophet. But they were mocking him.
But he could have said it.
Oh yeah, he could have. But remember, Jesus was not going to
Like a lamb
is silent. Jesus only answered when he had to. He didn't answer when he didn't. And they were mocking him. This is the mental torture that Jesus went through. We often think of the crucifixion and focus on the physical torture. And he had physical torture here. They struck him, they beat him. But there also is mental anguish going on here. They were mocking him. Who here likes to be mocked? No one likes to be mocked. It makes us feel ashamed. Makes us feel embarrassed. What have we done that we've deserved this? Well, of course, Jesus has done nothing to deserve this. And he's going through this agony. Matthew 27, verse 26. That's to Tim.
Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had slaughtered Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Okay, he was flogged with a weapon. It wasn't just a beating with the hands. He was flogged. He was scourged. More physical pain. No wonder when we get to Jesus having trouble carrying the cross that they had to get someone else to do it. Because by the time that Jesus got to the point where he had to go to Calvary, to the place where he'd be crucified, he'd probably been up for 24 hours, arrested at midnight, up all night, beaten, tortured, So no wonder he couldn't carry a cross beam from Jerusalem down to Golgotha. So they flogged him here. More mental or more physical anguish. Matthew 27, verses 27 to 31.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed on his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified.
All right. What happened here? Physical, mental anguish, or both? Both. So they stripped him of his clothes. They put a scarlet robe on him, a kingly attire. They were mocking him again. They gave him a crown. What type of crown? I suggest they didn't just take the crown of thorn, or take a thorn bush, wrap it into a crown, and place it on his head. What would they have done? They would have pushed it down onto his head. If you get a thorn bush, like as far as roses, and the thorns you're able to twist it without breaking the branches. Thorns aren't going to be all lined up in a nice spot. You're going to put place on his head. You're going to cut the skin doing that. Not something we do. I hate getting hit with thorns when I garden. And I don't garden that much, but when I do, I hate dealing and getting thorns because they'll stick in your skin. They will cut your skin and weaken him more. They mocked him, and then they took the robe off him, led him away to be crucified. In fact, they put a reed in his hand and they struck him on the head. I don't know whether that's here or in Mark. Oh, it's right here in verse 30. Struck him on the head, just putting that crown in. This is all before he gets to the cross. He hasn't gotten there yet. And look what he's suffering. Bill, you had something?
Well, it's just what the Catholics play a lot on this crown of thorns, and every Christmas we see, faces that are supposed to be Christ, with blood running down.
Mm-hmm.
I read in one Josephus that not to center so much on that, because they're dressing Christ up here
Mm-hmm.
as a clown almost.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be a king, and they're making him look ridiculous
Yeah.
as a king. And the thought they said with the crown was that it was like a garland.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly didn't represent a kingly crown.
Nope.
And it was all in an effort to make him look like a joke.
Sure.
This is your king.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. They were making him look not like a king. They were mocking him, saying, "This is the king," and they were having sport while doing it. And like as far as hitting, can you imagine walking up to a king and taking the reed from his hand and hitting his head? Can you imagine doing that? You're not a king. Look what I can do to you. That's the type of anguish Jesus had to go through.
It's so amazing that he even allowed himself.
Yeah.
He usually fights back when it's emotional ridicule.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet he allowed himself.
Yeah. Let's go to the cross. I'm going to get verses 35 to 44 just because we're running out of time. Then they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there. And they put over his head the accusation written against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And the robbers who were crucified with him, one on the right and another on the left. And those who passed by blasphemed, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others. Himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God." Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him and said the same thing. The Bible, when it comes to the crucifixion of Jesus, says they crucified him. The Bible doesn't go into all the gory details of how the nails were nailed through his wrists. More, we think it's through his hands, it's through his wrists. That's because you can't, if you put a nail through your hand's not going to hold you up. Your wrist will. Your wrist has a stronger muscles there. Same with your feet. It'd be through your ankles, not the actual foot itself. Think about if the Bible had described that. What detail it could have used. And yet it spared us that. So I don't like watching movies about the crucifixion. I have the real thing written right here. God wants me to know what he wants me to know. It was a gruesome death. It was basically suffocation in your own blood. And it was brutal. And even while on the cross, he suffered mental anguish. Come down from the cross. We'll believe you. He saved others. Himself he cannot save. Jesus could have come down from the cross, and he didn't. Lord.
Growing up, I've stepped on a nail or two. That was painful.
Yeah.
Imagine having something driven through your flesh into a board.
Yeah, and we're not talking little nails either. We're talking spikes, similar to the size of railroad spikes. That would be, like I said, they had to hold you up, not little nails. David.
I just have two questions. In verse 35 here, where we see that they cast lots for his garments, is this how we know that he was hung on the cross naked?
I believe, if not naked, almost naked. I don't know if he would be completely covered, or like if his waist would be covered, but this was part of the shame that the Romans put you through, is if you weren't completely naked, you were almost naked. And the garment was the only thing Jesus had that was of any value, his cloak, because it was one piece. So they cast lots for his garments, but when they got to his cloak, they didn't divide it. They kept it, and one person got it. So, yeah, this is how we know he was not fully clothed. And David, you had another one?
Yeah, just verse 44, where it says, "Thieves also which were crucified with him cast the same in his teeth." Basically, it said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the thief that came to repentance, I guess, and
Yeah.
said, "Remember me when you come into your
Mm-hmm.
kingdom." I'm just trying to reconcile the two, how he could 1 minute, if it's speaking of the same person, mock and criticize and ridicule the Lord, but then is that true repentance, or he says, "Remember me"?
No, I believe from Jesus' response, it was true repentance. Remember, they're on the cross for 6 hours, from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And we don't get until verse 45 that there was darkness on the land from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. So it seems like this, up to verse 44, is early on in the crucifixion. Everything's looking normal. And then you get to verse 45, and there was darkness throughout all the land from the 6th hour, from noon to 3. And so you see, the one thief on the cross would have seen some signs going on. There's darkness in the land. What's going on? This must be something special. And it's not going to be till Luke that we get the thief. In fact, Luke's the only one that tells us about the thief on the cross. Mark, if you look at Mark, same story. And they didn't focus on that. But it's amazing when you get time to consider some things, even in death. You realize you're going to die, and he didn't deserve it. And so he would have been hearing the mocking, he would have been seeing the signs, and obviously changed his heart later on. But it would have been much later in the day. Good? I didn't get to where I wanted to, which was going back to how we remember Jesus' death. We'll get that. We'll start there, the Lord willing, next Sunday.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord